The overgrown roses. From the kitchen window, Martha watched the wind wrestle with the overgrown roses. Thorny canes, thick as a man's wrist, clawed at the weathered brick of the house. Once, they'd been a riot of color, a fragrant testament to George's tireless devotion. Now they were a tangled mess, half smothered by bindweed and thistles, the few remaining blooms bruised and faded. She remembered George, his hands callous but gentle, pruning with meticulous care. "A rose needs discipline, Martha," he'd said, his eyes twinkling. "Needs a firm hand to bring out its beauty." He'd always made her laugh, even when he was covered head to toe in thorns. A phantom scent of rosewater and earth drifted to her, and she pressed a hand to her chest, a familiar ache blooming there. It had been almost a year since he'd last wielded his secateurs, a year since his laughter had echoed through the garden. The garden, once their shared sanctuary, had become a constant, painful reminder. She avoided it, drawing the curtains against its silent accusation. The weeds thrived on her neglect, each tendril a thread in the tightening web of her grief. She hadn't even ventured out to deadhead them. George had always said that deadheading was crucial, that removing the spent blooms encouraged new growth. But what was the point? What new growth could possibly blossom in the shadow of such a loss? The phone rang, startling her. It was Margaret, from the church. "Martha, dear, are you coming to the bake sale on Saturday? We're a bit short on volunteers this year." Martha hesitated. The bake sale meant people, meant forced smiles and platitudes, meant navigating the well-meaning but ultimately suffocating sympathy of her neighbors. I don't think so, Margaret," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not feeling quite up to it." "Oh, Martha, dear. We miss you. It's not the same without your lemon drizzle cake." The guilt pricked at her. She knew they missed her. She missed them, too, in a way. But the thought of facing them, of answering their inevitable questions about George, was unbearable. "Perhaps next time," she mumbled, and quickly ended the call. She turned back to the window, her gaze drawn once more to the neglected garden. A robin perched on a rosebush, its bright red breast a splash of defiant color against the drab backdrop. It cocked its head, as if studying her. A flash of memory, George kneeling in the flower bed, coaxing a stubborn rose into bloom. "Patience, Martha," he'd said, his voice soft. "Everything needs patience." But her patience had run out. She was tired of waiting, tired of grieving, tired of the constant ache in her heart. Yet the thought of confronting the garden, of wrestling with the overgrown roses, was daunting. It felt like betraying George somehow, by admitting that she couldn't manage without him. She reached for the kettle, a familiar ritual. Tea. Always tea. It wouldn't solve anything, but it would fill the silence, momentarily numb the pain. As she waited for the water to boil, she caught her reflection in the window. A pale, drawn face, framed by wisps of gray hair. She barely recognized herself. The robin took flight, disappearing into the tangle of roses. Martha sighed, the weight of her grief settling heavily on her shoulders. She knew she couldn't stay hidden inside forever. But stepping back into the world, stepping back into the garden, felt like an impossible task. An unexpected offer. The Ford pickup, a veteran of countless backroads, sputtered up Willow Creek Road. Liam fought the wheel, navigating a crater that threatened to swallow a tire. Client acquisition was the name of the game. His fledgling landscaping venture still lived and died by word of mouth. Then he spotted it, the ghost of a garden. It had surrendered to rampant weeds, now strangling the valiant few blooms that remained. A rose, once a beacon of crimson, now faded to a sorrowful blush, bowed before the clapboard of a quaint but obviously forgotten cottage. An unexpected pang resonated within him. He steered onto the shoulder, tires spitting gravel. A palpable loneliness clung to the house, a quiet despair that mirrored a feeling he couldn't quite name. Flaking paint marred the porch swing. Tired fabric hung limply in the windows. It bore the hallmarks of a place once cherished, now adrift in neglect. He hesitated. Normally, he'd deposit a flyer, a polite introduction to O'Connell's outdoor oasis, and move on. This felt different, urging him to a more personal approach. He worried his lip, sunlight catching the silver gleam of his pinky ring. Maybe the residents valued their privacy, or were content with their weedy wilderness. He almost talked himself out of it, hand hovering over the ignition, when a subtle shift in the curtains caught his eye. Someone observed him. Decision made. He killed the engine, the midday heat a welcome weight on his shoulders. The flagstone path, fractured by time, led him toward the front door, the tenacious scent of honeysuckle battling the aggressive weeds. He smoothed the front of his O'Connell's Outdoor Oasis t-shirt and inhaled deeply. He rapped on the door, the sound echoing unnaturally in the stillness. A beat of silence, then hinges groaned, revealing a woman with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. Hair the color of moonlight was swept into a loose chignon. She wore a floral dress, a little too generous for her slender frame. "Hello?" Liam offered, his smile broadening in response. "I'm Liam O'Connell. I was driving by and, well, I couldn't help but notice your garden." He gestured to the chaotic scene. "It has potential waiting to be rediscovered." Her smile wavered, a flicker of sadness dimming her eyes. "It was lovely," she murmured, her voice a soft caress. "But I haven't had the heart for it lately." "I understand," Liam replied, nodding empathetically. "Listen, I'm starting my own landscaping business, and I'd be honored to offer you a consultation. No strings attached, of course. Just to explore how we might breathe new life into it." He paused for emphasis, then added, "I can tell it was a cherished space." Her gaze, a gentle, watery blue, locked with his. He glimpsed something there, a faint ember of hope, perhaps? Or simply weary acceptance. "That's a very generous offer, Mr. O'Connell," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm Martha Ainsworth." A seed of hope. Martha nearly dropped the chipped china teacup. "Oh, I couldn't possibly, Mr. O'Connell." She dabbed at her mouth with a lace-edged napkin, more to stall for time than out of actual need. The sun, streaming through the grime-coated window, felt suddenly too bright, too exposing. Liam shifted his weight, his calloused hands fiddling with the brim of his worn baseball cap. "Liam, please. And it wouldn't be any trouble, Mrs. Ainsworth. I admire your garden. Or what it could be." She sighed, the sound like air escaping a punctured bellows. "It's beyond help, I'm afraid. Years of neglect, it's just easier to let it be." The thought of facing the overgrown wilderness, the tangled vines choking the life out of everything, was simply too exhausting. Easier, maybe, but not better. He spoke softly, his blue eyes holding a surprising depth. "My grandfather, he had a garden. Not grand like this one could be, but full of life. He always said a garden is a reflection of the soul. Neglect one, and you neglect the other." Martha felt a prickle of something she hadn't felt in years, a fragile tendril of hope, pushing its way through the hardened soil of her grief. She looked at Liam, really looked at him. He was young, barely more than a boy, but his eyes held an old wisdom. "My husband, George, he loved his roses," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He used to spend hours tending to them. Crimson Glory, Peace, Mr. Lincoln, he knew them all by name." Liam's face lit up. "Roses are my specialty. Pruning them properly, feeding them just the right nutrients, it can make all the difference. They're resilient roses. They can come back from almost anything." The image of George, his hands stained with earth, carefully deadheading a faded bloom, flickered in her mind. A wave of longing washed over her, so intense it almost buckled her knees. I don't know, Liam," she said, her voice trembling. "I haven't the money to pay you what you're worth." He waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry about that, Mrs. Ainsworth. Let me just tackle the roses. A small section, just to see if I can make a difference. If you don't like what I do, no harm done. I'll pack up my tools and be on my way." Martha hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and a surprising surge of anticipation. What did she have to lose? The garden was already a lost cause. And yet, something in Liam's earnest gaze, in his quiet passion for something beautiful, resonated with her. "All right," she said finally, the word barely a whisper. "The roses. Just the roses, to start." A tiny smile touched her lips. "And call me Martha." Memories in the soil. Liam attacked the weeds with a surprising ferocity, his brow furrowed in concentration. Martha watched him from the porch swing, the rhythmic squeak a counterpoint to the snip of his shears. He moved with an easy grace, kneeling, pulling, tossing the unwanted greenery into a burlap sack. He looked like he belonged there, amongst the overgrown roses and forgotten blooms. "You certainly have a knack for that," Martha called out, her voice raspy from disuse. Liam straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of dirt. "Just trying to give these beauties some breathing room. So, what's your favorite flower, Mrs. Ainsworth?" She considered the question, her gaze drifting across the riot of color and neglect. "George always said the perfect rose was a thing of wonder. He could coax blooms out of the most stubborn bushes. Me? I always loved lilies of the valley. Such delicate things, but they smell so hopeful." Liam nodded, resuming his work. "My grandmother grew sunflowers. Said they always turned towards the light, no matter what." "A wise woman, your grandmother," Martha said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "George had all sorts of little tricks. He'd bury banana peels at the base of the rose bushes. Said the potassium was the secret to big, bold blooms. And he always talked to them. Silly, I suppose, but they seemed to respond." Liam chuckled. "Talking to plants? I've heard worse. My mom sings to hers. Claims it helps them grow." He paused, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Maybe I should try serenading your roses." Martha laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. "I think they'd appreciate that. They haven't heard much music lately." She watched him work in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the buzzing of bees and the rustle of leaves. "George always said the soil had a memory. That everything that ever happened here, all the joy and sorrow, it was all absorbed into the earth. That's why he loved gardening so much. He said it was like tending to the past." Liam looked up, his expression thoughtful. "That's a beautiful way to think about it." He pointed to a cluster of faded pink roses struggling to bloom amidst the weeds. "These are peace roses, aren't they? My great-aunt had them. She said they were bred at the end of the war, a symbol of hope for the future." Martha's eyes welled up. "Yes, George planted them right after we bought the house. We were so full of hope then, starting our life together." She reached out, her fingers tracing the delicate petals of a nearby rose. "He used to say that gardening was an act of faith. That you planted a seed, and trusted that it would grow, even when you couldn't see it happening." Her voice cracked. "I haven't had much faith lately, Liam." He stopped what he was doing, his gaze meeting hers. "Sometimes, Mrs. Ainsworth, all it takes is a little tending to see the first shoots." He knelt beside the rose bush, gently pruning away a dead branch. "These roses, they've got good roots. They just need a little help to bloom again. Just like everyone else." Whispers in the neighborhood. The roses, those stubborn, neglected things, were staging a comeback. Liam, with his gentle hands and quiet hums, had coaxed them from their thorny slumber. Crimson, blush pink, and a delicate apricot, they unfurled in the morning sun, their fragrance a sweet, heady perfume that drifted through Martha's open windows. She found herself drawn to the garden, something she hadn't felt in years. Liam was there most mornings, weeding with a methodical patience, or pruning with a sculptor's eye. He didn't chatter, didn't pry. He simply worked, and Martha, observing from the porch swing, found a strange comfort in his presence. One morning, she ventured out, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face. "They're beautiful, Liam," she said, her voice a little rusty from disuse. He straightened, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "They were just waiting for a little attention, Mrs. Ainsworth." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. It felt foreign, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. She walked among the roses, inhaling their scent, feeling the velvety petals between her fingers. The sun warmed her skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on her chest seemed to lighten. Across the street, behind lace-curtained windows, Mrs. Gable's eyes narrowed. She'd been watching, of course. Mrs. Gable watched everything. The young man, the roses, Martha's, well, almost girlish demeanor. It was all quite scandalous, really. Imagine, she muttered to her cat, Clementine, a fluffy Persian who blinked languidly. A woman her age carrying on like that. And with a boy young enough to be her grandson. Later that day, while ostensibly returning a borrowed teacup to Mrs. Henderson next door, Mrs. Gable made sure to mention the interesting development across the street. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Such a shame about dear Arthur, of course. But some people certainly don't waste any time, do they? And the things one sees these days. She shook her head sadly, her eyes gleaming with gossip. The whispers began to circulate through the neighborhood like a persistent draft. Speculation bloomed, as vibrant and invasive as bindweed. Some pitied Martha, seeing her as a lonely widow preyed upon. Others tooted and clucked, aghast at the perceived impropriety. Martha remained oblivious, lost in the quiet sanctuary of her garden. Liam had shown her how to deadhead the roses, how to encourage new growth. He'd even started a small vegetable patch, promising fresh tomatoes and herbs. The garden was transforming, and so was she. One afternoon, Liam brought her a small bouquet of lavender, tied with twine. For your kitchen, Mrs. Ainsworth. It keeps the moths away, and smells lovely. Martha took the bouquet, her fingers brushing his. Thank you, Liam, she said, her cheeks flushed. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You're very welcome. From behind her curtains, Mrs. Gable watched, her lips pursed in disapproval. The lavender, the shared smiles, it was all the confirmation she needed. The whispers intensified, carried on the breeze like the scent of roses, sweet and deceptively innocent. Carol's concerns. Gravel popped and crunched under Carol's practical shoes as she steered into the driveway. No phone call preceded this visit, a spontaneous check-in seemed necessary. The house possessed an unexpected vitality. Had her mother finally tackled that peeling trim? Marching up the flagstone path, her handbag a tight anchor, she spied him. A young man, kneeling amidst the riot of roses, sunlight catching in the dark waves of his hair. A quiet hum, a wordless melody, accompanied the decisive clicks of his pruning shears. Liam, Martha had mentioned him, so casually, as though hiring horticultural help was commonplace. Carol found her mother rocking on the porch swing, a paperback resting unread in her lap, her attention completely absorbed by the scene unfolding in the garden. Mom! What a surprise visit! Carol's greeting was cheerful, though suspicion sharpened her gaze. Martha started, a genuine smile illuminating her features. Carol! Darling, how lovely! I wasn't expecting you. Carol embraced her mother, a brief, businesslike hug. Just thought I'd drop by. See how you are. Her eyes drifted back to Liam. And who might this be? Martha's smile broadened. That's Liam. He's been tending the garden. Carol settled onto the swing, maintaining a careful distance. Tending? Is that what you call it? An intense fragrance of roses permeated the air. Liam straightened, dusting his hands on his worn jeans. He possessed kind eyes, Carol conceded grudgingly, and a winning, open smile. Morning, Mrs. Davies. These roses are really thriving. Carol, please. And you must call me Martha. She glanced at her daughter. Liam's been a lifesaver. He's incredibly knowledgeable about roses. So it seems. Carol's tone was clipped and precise. And what does this lifesaver cost you, Mum? Liam shifted, looking uncomfortable. I haven't really finalized anything, Mrs. Davies. It's more about helping out. Carol made a soft, derisive sound. Helping out. Of course. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. Mom, he looks barely old enough to shave. Are you certain about this? Martha's smile wavered slightly. Carol, honestly. Liam is perfectly trustworthy. He simply enjoys gardening, and I haven't been able to manage it myself, since, well. Carol's expression softened marginally, though distrust lingered. I know, Mum. I just worry. You're vulnerable, and some people might exploit that. She made a sweeping gesture towards Liam, who was now pretending profound interest in a particularly stubborn thorn. Don't be absurd, Carol. Liam is not exploiting anything. He's become a good friend. A new steel entered Martha's voice, a quality Carol hadn't detected in years. Carol persisted, undeterred. Honestly, Mom, you should consider moving to the city. A charming apartment near me. We could attend shows, have leisurely lunches. You wouldn't have to contend with this sprawling house or the garden. And you certainly wouldn't need to depend on the charity of strangers. Martha's gaze remained fixed on the rose bushes, a faraway expression in her eyes. I'm happy here, Carol. This is my home. And I have no intention of leaving it. Or my roses. Carol sighed, that familiar irritation rising within her. It's simply not safe, Mum. And it's isolating. You deserve more than this. Liam cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. I should probably get back to work. He offered Martha a respectful nod and retreated behind a cascade of climbing roses, effectively curtailing the conversation. Carol followed his movements with narrowed eyes. We'll just see about that, she murmured under her breath, a challenge hanging in the air. A mother's defense. Liam stopped dead, trowel clattering against the terracotta pot. Carol's voice, sharp and laced with disapproval, sliced through the late afternoon air. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the words, carried on the gentle breeze, were impossible to ignore. Utterly inappropriate, Martha. He's practically a boy. And what does he want, really? Sympathy? Your money? You're being naive. He felt the warmth of the sun drain away, replaced by a cold, hollow ache. He hadn't asked for anything, hadn't even hinted. He genuinely enjoyed the roses, the quiet companionship. Now, standing frozen by the wisteria-covered wall, he felt like a charlatan exposed. He set the trowel down, the metallic click echoing in the sudden silence, and turned to leave, his shoulders slumped. Inside the house, Martha bristled. Carol, that's enough! She pushed back from the kitchen table, the floral teacup rattling in its saucer. The scent of Earl Grey suddenly felt cloying. You're out of line. Carol folded her arms, her expression unyielding. I'm just being realistic, Martha. You're vulnerable right now. And he's convenient. Convenient? Martha's voice rose, a tremor of anger she hadn't felt in months shaking her. He's been kind. He's brought life back into this garden, into this empty house. Something you haven't managed in all these months of sensible visits. Carol's face softened, but only slightly. I'm trying to protect you. Protect me? Martha rounded on her, her grief momentarily eclipsed by a fierce protectiveness of her own. From what, Carol? From a little bit of sunshine? From someone who sees me as something other than a grieving widow? I am perfectly capable of making my own decisions, thank you very much. I may be older, but I'm not stupid. She walked to the window, peering out at the rose bushes, her breath fogging the glass. She could just make out Liam's retreating figure disappearing around the side of the house. A pang of guilt twisted in her stomach. Liam is a good person. She continued, turning back to face Carol. He isn't some fortune hunter preying on my supposed fragility. He simply enjoys gardening, and he's good at it. And I enjoy his company. Is that so hard to believe? Carol remained silent, her gaze fixed on the patterned tablecloth. Martha knew Carol loved her, in her own pragmatic, often suffocating way. But this was too much. You need to trust me, Carol, Martha said, her voice softening slightly. Trust that I can navigate my own life, even if it doesn't fit into your carefully constructed box of what's appropriate. She stood taller, feeling a strength she hadn't realized she possessed rising within her. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a gardener to apologize to. The storm and the shelter. The first clap of thunder rattled the windows, a brutal percussion that vibrated through Martha's bones. Rain lashed against the glass, blurring the outside world into an impressionistic smear of green and gray. She stood at the kitchen window, her heart a trapped bird fluttering against her ribs. The roses. All those delicate blooms, Liam's meticulous pruning, the fragile promise of new life. Panic tightened her chest. She grabbed her raincoat, fumbling with the buttons. Before she could reach the back door, a figure materialized in the downpour, a dark silhouette running towards the house. It was Liam, his hair plastered to his forehead, his face etched with concern. "Martha! Are you all right?" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the wind. He didn't wait for an answer, just pulled open the door and ushered her back inside. "We need to get those climbing roses secured. The trellises won't hold in this." Without a word, Martha nodded, grabbing her heavy gardening gloves. They battled their way back outside, the wind tearing at their clothes, the rain stinging their faces. Liam immediately started reinforcing the trellises with thick twine, his movements quick and efficient. Martha, though less agile, held the structure steady, her hands aching with the effort. Just as one trellis threatened to buckle completely, a light flickered on in the house next door. Carol emerged, a beacon in the gloom, clad in a bright yellow rain slicker. Martha hadn't seen her since. Well, since that awkward conversation about Liam. "Need a hand?" Carol yelled, her voice surprisingly strong. She waded through the flooded garden, her face set in a determined expression. "I've got extra stakes in the shed." Together, the three of them worked through the storm. Carol, with her practical efficiency, hammered in the stakes, securing the trellises with surprising force. Liam, ever watchful, guided Martha, showing her how to protect the more delicate blooms with overturned pots. Martha, fueled by a fierce protectiveness she hadn't felt in years, followed his instructions, her initial panic slowly giving way to a quiet sense of purpose. The rain continued to fall in sheets, but the garden, though battered, was holding. Hours passed in a blur of wind, rain, and shared effort. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in bruised hues of gray and pink, the storm finally began to subside. They stood together, soaked and exhausted, surveying the scene. The garden was a mess, littered with fallen leaves and broken branches, but the roses, miraculously, were mostly intact. Carol, wiping rain from her face, looked at Liam and Martha, a flicker of something akin to understanding in her eyes. "You two really care about this place, don't you?" Martha, leaning heavily on her spade, met Carol's gaze. "It's more than just a garden, Carol." Liam, standing beside her, squeezed her hand gently. The simple gesture, witnessed by Carol, spoke volumes. In the shared struggle against the storm, a silent understanding had blossomed, stronger than any gale. Carol saw it, and for the first time, Martha thought, she truly understood. New beginnings. The storm had clawed at the garden, leaving a mess of fallen branches and scattered petals. Yet, an unexpected beauty remained. The roses, though battered, still clung to their stems, their colors intensified by the rain. Sunlight, fractured and shimmering, dripped through the gaps in the clouds, illuminating the water droplets clinging to leaves like tiny jewels. Martha surveyed the scene, a mix of sorrow and relief warring within her. The garden, like her, had weathered the worst. "Quite a show," Liam said, appearing beside her with a rake in hand. His smile was warm, a promise of sunshine after the storm. "But nothing we can't handle." Together they worked. Liam, with his youthful energy, cleared the larger debris while Martha carefully pruned the damaged roses, her hands surprisingly steady. The scent of wet earth and bruised petals filled the air, a poignant reminder of life's fragility and resilience. "George always hated this part," Martha confessed, pausing to wipe her brow. "Said it was too much like cleaning up after a disaster." Liam chuckled softly. "Well, he's not here to complain, is he? Besides, think of it as making room for new growth." And new growth there was. Liam, With Carol's reluctant assistance, she grumbled about the lack of a proper plan but still hauled wheelbarrows, transformed the damaged patch into something vibrant. He even convinced Martha to agree to a small gathering, a garden party to celebrate its rebirth. Carol, predictably, disapproved. A party, Martha? Really? Seems a bit frivolous. Martha, however, stood her ground, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. It's not frivolous, Carol. It's a celebration of life, of hope. Something we all need. The day of the party dawned clear and bright. The garden, transformed, was a riot of color. Tables draped in linen were scattered amongst the flower beds, laden with cakes and sandwiches. Guests, mostly neighbors and friends from the village, milled about, their laughter mingling with the gentle hum of bees. Martha, dressed in a soft blue dress, felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. As the afternoon wore on, she gathered everyone around her. I wanted to thank you all for being here, she began, her voice slightly shaky. This garden, it was George's pride and joy. And after he was gone, I let it go. I let everything go. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her friends, settling for a moment on Liam, who stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. But Liam, he showed me that even after the harshest storms, new life can bloom. This garden is a testament to that. And while George will always be in my heart, I realize it's okay to open myself up to new beginnings. The applause was warm and heartfelt. Later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn, Martha found herself alone with Liam near the far end of the garden. He held a small trowel and a handful of tulip bulbs. I thought we could plant these together, he said, his voice low. A promise of spring. Martha took a bulb from his hand, its papery skin surprisingly smooth. Together they knelt in the soft earth, pressing the bulbs into the ground. As they worked, their hands brushed, a spark of electricity passing between them. Thank you, Liam, she said softly, her eyes meeting his. For everything. He smiled, a hint of shyness in his expression. The pleasure was all mine, Martha. As they stood, side by side, gazing out at the garden bathed in the golden light of dusk, Martha felt a sense of peace settle over her. The grief was still there, a gentle ache in her heart, but it was no longer all-consuming. Beside her, the promise of spring, and perhaps something more, bloomed.